It's a preservation story unlike any other. A railroad frozen in 1956 that survives over 60 years later. This narrow gauge railroad in Pennsylvania defies belief. What's up, guys? This is Heiss, and what you see behind me is not a museum. It's not a fabrication, it's not a replica. This is a real railroad, and the cars, locomotives, buildings, everything that's been here for over 100 years is all original to its own fabric. This is the East Broad Top Railroad. East Broad Top was chartered in 1856. Construction didn't begin until 1872 and was ultimately finished in 1874. It connected the coal mining region of Robertsdale, Pennsylvania, to the larger Pennsylvania Railroad in Mount Union. The bituminous coal of the Broad Top Mountain was known for its high quality, and the railroad, which included ownership of the mines, was perfectly positioned to take advantage of this. The railroad was built as a narrow gauge railroad. The unique choice in gauge and its remote location meant that they had to build their own shop complex.
You start building a railroad in 1874, they quickly needed a shop,
right,
to maintain the locomotives and the equipment.
This is Brad Esposito, general manager of the railroad. With over 20 years of experience working for freight railroads, he took the opportunity in 2020 to spearhead the rebirth of the East Broad Top.
Left a good job in the city, working for the man every night and day. You haven't seen me break out in song yet. I was never in that good a mood at my old job until Demetrius comes in with his coal spewing locomotive and kills all our greenery.
I've worked in railroad machine shops. I've had a little bit of experience doing a couple of these things, but I've never seen a complete setup like this. They were set up to do everything here, weren't they?
This is a very well-equipped shop for a small railroad, and relatively modern too, considering the last piece of equipment was purchased around 1920s. They were able to do just about anything large, small, in between. Where we're standing, we're kind of the original footprint of it. Obviously, when they started, they had much smaller locomotives. So over time, as the equipment got bigger, they just expanded the buildings. The machine shop, the boiler shop in the back got bigger and bigger as time went on.
Right. How many hopper cars did they maintain?
They had a fleet of over 250. Almost all of them were built here too. The steel cars that you see out here now, there was an original order that they had ordered 2-bay cars. They liked the design, and somebody here came up with the idea of just expanding them to 3 bays. And then they built, I think, 250 of them in these shops.
While the primary commodity hauled by the railroad was coal, it also transported a great deal of ganister, a type of rock used in manufacturing industrial brick furnaces. One aspect that has always set the railroad apart is that for as long as it was a common carrier, it remained primarily steam-powered. Other than a gas-electric car, no diesels were ever purchased for either passenger or freight service. In 1956, coal prices continued to decline, which led to a decline in traffic on the railroad, which ultimately led to the railroad shutting down. And it would have been the final shutdown for the railroad if it were not for one individual.
My father, as a young boy, saved his money to buy a toy train set. When he saved enough money, he entrusted his brother to go down to Sears and Roebuck and order a toy train set. Well, Joe never went down, never spent the money, and my dad didn't get his toy train. So all his life, my dad yearned for a toy train. This railroad came up for sale, and my dad fought, negotiated. He went to 13 different banks to get money for the down payment. And lo and behold, he ended up with the East Broad Top Railroad and Coal Company. So after he bought it, he was walking around the premise. He happened to go near the roundhouse, and he heard some noise, calamity. Sidebar shaking, wimping. He wondered what's going on. So he walked in around the door, and he heard Millie, engine number 12, who spoke first. Millie said to her fellow engines, "Here he is, this is the scrapper, this is the junk man, he's gonna cut us up, and I bet because I'm the smallest one, I'll be first." And then more crying as water all over the floor. It was a horrible scene. And my dad listened for a little while. He says, "Whoa," he says, "I've heard enough." He says, "I am the scrapper, but I guarantee you as long as I live, I will never put a torch to any one of you. And I want to see you back on the rails shortly."
When the citizens of Orbisonia came to Nick Kowalczyk asking if he could bring one of the steam locomotives out for display for a parade, he did one better and reopened the railroad as a tourist line. For over 50 years, the East Broad Top brought smiles to the faces of people around the country. One highlight each year were the spectacular events, when 4 of the surviving steam locomotives were fired up and operated, sometimes all on the same train. Sadly, in 2011, rising insurance costs forced the Kowalczyk family to end operations and seek a buyer for the railroad. Once again, the shop, the locomotives, all the facilities waited. So how did the railroad get its second rebirth? While the railroad wasn't running, the Friends of the East Broad Top kept hard at work ensuring that the buildings didn't sink into the soft ground and refurbishing pieces of equipment. Through their dedication, they helped to ensure that this railroad was not forgotten.
This is a project that I actually volunteer was involved with. If you look above us here, if it looks like new wood,
Okay.
it is. The building had deteriorated so much through the 90s that there was a cribbing all above it that kept the building from falling. It had settled almost 3 feet. Over a period of a couple of years, a pretty dedicated group of the Friends, they called the Boiler House Rats, because that's pretty much what you felt like when you were crawling around in here.
I believe it.
They took and rebuilt the entire structure above it. So this is just a testament to what the volunteers can do. The stacks used to be about 30 feet taller. We had to cut them down because it deteriorated.
Right.
My dad was here volunteering. He opens the door and there's literally a duck, a living duck, sitting there right inside the clean out door. But that thing must have had one heck of a ride. Like it was just flying over, the wind hit it, it sucked it right down 88 feet of smokestack, and then there's a living duck at the bottom of the smokestack.
Quack.
They took it out, put it in the water, and went on its merry way.
You have to understand that these volunteers were placing a great deal of faith in the idea that this railroad would survive. There was no guarantee that the railroad would make it. They were driven by a belief that preserving this railroad mattered to share it with future generations. In 2020, a group of industry experts and fans came together to create a new organization and purchase the railroad from the Kowalczyk family. Using their additional financial resources, they immediately set about refurbishing the track, stabilizing the buildings, and getting a steam locomotive operating once again. A press event was held on Valentine's Day to announce the good news.
I've made the right decision. My Father in heaven told me it's the right decision. And we're going forward. You're going to see great things happen.
Because of the Kowalczyk family and their love of the place and what they've done to keep it here, I can say there's 4 generations of my own family that have been here since 1960 to ride the trains. My grandfather, my dad, myself, and my kids. And so really the biggest thing, and I'm very excited to be a part of it, is to preserve that for their kids and your grandkids and kids. We first came here in 99.
We did, we were dating, and I thought he was a dork.
Yeah.
20 years later, here we are, huh?
3 years after the launch, I traveled to central Pennsylvania to see this railroad for myself. The railroad was hosting its annual Winter Spectacular event, and locomotive number 16, having undergone a 3-year rebuild, was making its first public appearance since 1956. Despite all that I'd heard about it, I still wasn't prepared for just how awe-inspiring the place is. Not just because of what's been saved, but the people behind saving it. This railroad is so much larger than just one person or one entity. You could tell so many stories about it, from its common carrier era to the people who made sure that it was going to stay around as it was left. Second chances are really rare, and third chances are even rarer. The fact that the railroad is using that third chance to take care of their buildings, to restore the locomotives, all in the name of preservation and keeping this incredible landmark the way that it was, is ridiculously exciting. Preserving this is certainly a never-ending task. It's through this collective spirit that old stories are discovered and new ones are created. It is a landmark to the power of antiquity and to the people that have defined it. It is the East Broad Top.